Okay, welcome back to Cultural Anthropology, as we're talking about religion. I just realized that I'm sitting in front of a green screen with a green shirt on. I hope that I don't look funky. We'll see as I do the editing on this. But we're going to get back to the lecture. We're going to be talking about rites of passage. Okay, so basically a rite of passage is sort of this idea that at some point in your life you're going to go through a transition. And oftentimes these transitions are practiced in a religious format, that you are transcending from one aspect of your life into another. Oftentimes there's some sort of maybe a rank that goes along with it, or there might be a progression from childhood to adulthood. And so here's a couple of examples. So a rite of passage could be birth. Okay, birth as a rite of passage would be from the spiritual world into the material world. So birth can be an aspect of that. The coming of age, in the United States, we have coming of age as sort of there's multiple coming of age areas. Oftentimes it can be seen as like your 10th birthday or your 16th birthday when you can, finally drive. And that's a big responsibility when you can actually get a driver's license and be able to drive yourself around. That can be a coming of age rite of passage, because now you've got more responsibility, not only to yourself, because you're probably gonna have to pay your own insurance, and you're gonna have to get a job to pay for gas and all of that stuff. But you're also responsible to the people that you're around, right? You have to be trained. You have to be taught how to drive and how to behave on the road, so that you are not a destructive force. So that can be one of these rites of passage, is learning how to drive. And, turning 18, so let's say you join the military. That can be a rite of passage, and there can be multiple rites of passage within there. Gaining a rank or completing a training, which can lead to different ideas about what's going on. Getting married is a rite of passage. Oftentimes, especially in our culture, getting married is seen as sometimes as a transition from sort of childhood and adolescence to adulthood. You might be in your 20s, but you're not really an adult until you've been married, right? And that's been sort of a cultural identifier for us as a long time. That is something that is a natural process. And especially if we look at Christianity, that you're not necessarily fulfilled until you have that partner, and until you're able to procreate and have kids of your own. Do you fully become that adult? So baptism, is a rite of passage. Death can be a rite of passage. Especially when we consider how religions treat the afterlife. Like what is the afterlife? And if we experience death, it might be considered to be the shedding of the physical realm and having our spiritual beings transcend into heaven or the ether, whatever that afterlife looks like. Death can be that rite of passage as well to the hereafter. If we look at like pilgrimages are oftentimes seen as a rite of passage as well. Sometimes it's not necessarily the destination, but the journey. I'm sure some of you have probably heard that. Because it's this rite of passage where you start out at one point, and through this progression become something else. And it's not always about the individual, but it's about sharing that that past. So a pilgrimage might also be following in somebody else's footsteps and following what everyone else has done before you, and creating that connection, that understanding of experience. That this is something that you did, that I've done, and we now share together, and we have a deeper understanding of each other because we've had these similar experiences. So pilgrimages can be a very interesting way of progressing within a religion, and can be a means of sort of stepping it up a notch, right? Because now you have, again, sort of another rite of passage, and you've got more in connection with people who've shared that similar experience. So I'm going to bring up a point here that I'm not a big fan of Karl Marx. I think a lot of the stuff that Marx did is really important to understand, but isn't necessarily completely applicable to modern society, because the thing that we've come to understand is that modern society is extremely complex, and Marx, I think, had some very, very interesting and poignant ways of viewing things, but was a little bit more simplistic in his observations. But one of the things that he brought up about religion, and I think it's important to bring this up, is that he felt that religion was more of a distraction for people, that it's dulled their life and their pain to what was really going on. And this is important to look at the criticisms of religion. And in this case, he was talking a lot about Christianity, that the powers that have religion, the powers that determine how people behave and all of this stuff, we have to look at and to see how they control and how they use that power of influence. And so he was very critical about how religion was used as a power source. He believed that the proletariat, and the proletariat is basically the common people, that it was used against them to basically placate them, because at the time people were there weren't any like serious labor laws. There were all kinds of complaints about working conditions, and the corporate owners and the businessmen and all this stuff, the people that had the power didn't care. They were like, hey, I'm gonna work you to the bone for meager wages. And that's what Marx was seeing, was that all of this stuff was creating disparities, and that religion was being used as a means to sort of like, listen, we know you're tired, we know that you're in pain, we know that you're living a terrible life, that nothing is going well, but if you just keep doing this and keep being virtuous in this, right? If you work hard and behave well, then you'll get into heaven. And guess what? Heaven is like super rad, and you're going to love it, right? You're going to love it. But to get there, you're going to have to toil, and you're going to have to sacrifice, and you're going to have to do all these things in the mortal realm right now. And I know that it sucks, but believe me, when you get to heaven, it's going to be totally cool. It's not going to be like, and I don't know if you kids use this stuff. Kids, I don't know if you're all kids. Like fire, right? It's going to be super fire. But that would be like hell. and we don't want to go to hell. But that's the idea, is that religion was used as a means to control people to behave well, because eventually, right, eventually they would go to heaven and things would be much better. And this is certainly the case. It might not necessarily be about religion, it's about control. And if there's one thing that we know, is that people, especially the rich folks, also seek control and power. And how do they exert that control and power over other people? And in some cases, religion has been used as a manifestation of that, as a means to control. So how do we look at a community, at a church, at a religious institution, and see how that institution is behaving towards its constituents, right? It's believers. What is it being used for? Is it being used for good? Is it being used for evil? Is it, what's going on here? And so, Marx, his opinion was that it's all bad. There really isn't a lot of good things going on here. And, that's, as an anthropologist, and most anthropologists don't really subscribe to this kind of thinking, we do appreciate sort of the concepts that it brings up. And it brings up very important issues as far as power and abuse within religious institutions. One of the things that I think is really interesting to look at is sort of this idea of cultural materialism. This is a topic that's brought up by Marvin Harris. He's an anthropologist that's been around for years. One of his famous books, and I really do suggest that all of you go out and read this book. If you're interested in anthropology, it's a little bit older. It's been around for 40 some odd years now. It's called Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches. And the thing that I really like about this particular book is that what Harris is trying to do is sort of understand the practical reasons why people behave the way they do. That there is some particular reason why we have religion, or why we don't eat pork, or why we persecute witchcraft. All of these different things have an important aspect that we have to try and understand the practicality behind it. As an example, one of the things that he brings up is, why do certain religions not eat pork? Okay, if we look at Judaism or Islam, where pork is not acceptable to be eaten, one of the things that he brings up, which I think is a very interesting idea, is that what's bad about pigs? Okay, so this example that he uses is like, okay, so let's think about where a lot of the people that practice these religions come from, right? We're looking at like the desert, right? We're looking at the Middle East. We're looking at places where it's hot. There's not a lot of water. And if we look at the biology of pigs, they don't do well in hot climates, right? Or not necessarily hot climates, but really hot and dry climates. They don't do particularly well. They're also not particularly great herding animals as far as being able to control and maneuver them around. They're not like sheep or cattle. They also don't have a lot of extra uses. A pig itself is kind of more or less a meat animal, right? You raise pork for its meat. Where if you raise sheep or goats, right, you get multiple uses. You can get milk. You can get the hair, the fur from sheep. Same way with cattle. You know, you can raise them for food, but you can also use them for milk or the dung. So, you know, cattle, especially if you look at India, where cattle are believed to be spiritually important. Well, their dung is used for fires. It's a fuel. It's considered a fuel source. So you have people that will go around collecting cow dung from around these communities, and then they will sell it to households as a fuel source. Now, can you imagine that happening here in the United States? I mean, it sounds kind of, I mean, to me, it sounds kind of gross, right? I mean, this is cow poop, right? And I'm using it to cook dinner with. But there, it's not seen as bad. In fact, it's seen as a good thing to be able to do this, because we're also appreciating cattle and cattle love it. And so because of that, you can't eat cattle, right? Because you have this Brahmin belief system. And so Harris takes this and says, okay, there are reasons why these things are important. You know, if we look at the pigs in the Middle East, they don't work well because they can't stay healthy in these hot and dry environments. And to stay cool, they will, you know, roll around in their own feces to stay cool, because they have to figure out a way to stay cool because there's not enough water, which is why they do really well in jungle environments or temperate environments, because they can stay cool much easier than in a desert environment. So there might be practical reasons. You know, the fact that they're not good herding animals, so that if you have nomadic traditions that like sheep herders and cattle, well, you know, they've got multiple uses too. So some of his observations were about figuring out practical reasons why there were certain beliefs. And, you know, whether or not they sort of coincide with the religious beliefs of why you shouldn't do this or why you shouldn't do that. That was not necessarily the point. It was to think about the practical reasons of why this might be the case. And not to dissuade from the spiritual side. You know, we're incorporating that into this information. You know, what is the beliefs? Why do people? Well, they're filthy animals, right? The pigs, they're dirty animals, so we can't ingest that. We can't take that in. And, you know, I don't know if I'd want to eat a pig if I saw it rolling around in its own feces to try and stay cool. I mean, I could totally understand that. So, but what Harris is trying to do is take a look at these practical reasons why. So, you know, I think it's really important to, as we look at religion, if we look at all of this stuff, trying to understand the practical reasons. Why do we behave this way? You know, why do we gather every week to go to church? Right? Have you ever asked that question? Why every week? Why on Sunday? You know, you get dressed up, you go to church. I don't know if any of you do. I don't. I'm not a religious individual. But why do so many Christians do? Why do they get dressed up in their nice clothes and they go to church? And what's the reasoning behind that? Well, there's a number of reasons why you might do that. One is maintaining that community. One of the things about going to a church is, who do you see there? How do you interact with other people, because, you know, the activity of going to church isn't just about being at church, but it's about going to and returning from. It's about people getting together to go to lunch afterwards or beforehand. It's about creating that community. It's about families coming together, sometimes families that don't see each other, but at those times, and maintaining those relationships with each other. It's about getting the young folk together so that they can meet and, you know, go out on dates and eventually get married and have babies, right? That will perpetuate that community. So if we look at the practical reasons why people behave the way that they do, if we look at the practical reasons behind rituals, or the eating or the non-eating of a particular animal, there could be very, very practically good reasons for that that might not necessarily be observable by someone that practices that that sort of behavior. So again, and that goes back to Gertz, you know, doing the thick description, okay, doing that deep dive into a community and trying to understand the different pieces that people are going to pull together, and why they behave the way that they do. Looking at those practical reasons. So really, really important to understand why, and to take a look at it. And not necessarily taking on sort of the reasons that you might be given. Okay, so if you're studying a religion and they say, well, don't do this because of this, right? Don't eat pigs because of this reason. Well, you know, understand why that they're saying it. Take that as a part of that information, but also, you know, say, what else? What else is attached to this? What else is motivating this sort of behavior? So, you know, as we look at religion and meaning and power, right? We understand that religion is a means to understanding the world and how we all fit in it. It's also a way of maintaining power and oftentimes influence. And a lot of times this can be very different from sort of materialistic power, or martial power, or even hegemonic power. It's a power to influence behavior, and this is something that is really important to understand with religion, with how people choose to go about their lives, right? Why do we accept the word coming from someone else as a absolute, right? If we're looking at again, like Christianity, and you go to church and the priest comes out and says, okay, you know, this is the truth, this is the word of God, all of this stuff, this is how you should behave. And then you leave and that's what you do, right? This is your behavior. This is what you're supposed to do on a daily basis. Why do people do that, right? Why is it so favorable for people to behave a certain way? And that's something that we have to try and understand, is why is this behavior beneficial to a group, right? If we're looking at following a certain path, we have to understand that there are favorable consequences to following that path. And what are those favorable consequences? And then what are the negative consequences for not following that path, right? So this is something that is really important important to try and figure out is that, what are people getting out of it? And then what happens when they screw up? And where does that all fit within the community, right? We had that discussion early on in the semester talking about what do we consider lawful yet unmoral or immoral versus what is moral and unlawful. Okay, so this is one of those situations where we can see how some of the stuff might come into question. What are the activities that you might be able to do that could cause certain consequences within the community that might be outside of any given governmental law system, right? And in this case, an example I might use would be something like abortion, right? In many states, abortion is legal, yet it is considered immoral within a religious institution. So, but what are the consequences if somebody does have an abortion? What happens to that community? What happens to the woman that has this done? Where do they fall in, right? What happens? So if we look at that kind of stuff, again, we get a broader picture of what is behaviorally acceptable, your norms, and versus your values, right? If you were to have an abortion, you might be ostracized from that community, from that church, because abortion is seen as in many communities to be a major sin. And if it's a major sin, that's like excommunication, or that's, being kicked out of the church. So big consequences, even though legally there might not be any consequences because it can be completely legal by the eyes of the state. We have these different conflicts. So understanding how those ideals and norms fit within the larger scape of a community when it comes to, like governmental laws, are going to be really important, again, to figure out why people behave the way that they do. They create symbols. Okay, we talked a little bit about symbols earlier, but these symbols are designed to create kind of like a constant reminder. Probably some of you are wearing a necklace, right? And that necklace might have a cross on it. And that cross might have, Jesus on it, or it might just be a very simple cross, but it is a constant reminder to you about your ideology, about your beliefs. I mean, heck, myself, right? I have, this is Mjolnir, right? This is Thor's hammer. My family's Scandinavian, and as a totem that I wear, I'm not particularly religious, but it is a constant reminder to me about sort of my ancestry, right? And different ideas and different things that I believe in particular. So we create these items that we carry with us. Sometimes it's a bracelet, sometimes it's a piece of clothing, sometimes it's a book or a hat, a habit of a nun, or and a hijab. There's all these different things that we create that become symbols within that religion, and it helps to reinforce this conduct of behavior, right? What's appropriate? I like wearing Viking stuff because it makes me feel Viking-ish, you know, rar, rar. Other people wear different things to remind them of their the type of behavior that they want to follow, the things that are important to them, that connection to that community, and to the people that think like them and talk like them. And it reinforces all of these different things. And that's why symbols are so absolutely very important to understand and realize how much of an impact they can have on any particular subject. I mean, as an example, like let's say you take a cross out. Okay, you take that cross and you snap it in half. You just break it over your knee, and that cross is now in 2 or 3 different pieces. What did you just do? Well, yeah, so you broke a couple of boards, right? The material itself is of no consequence. It's the representation behind that cross. You have not only just broken some pieces of wood, but you have attacked an ideology, right? You have attacked the meaning behind these beliefs and this person's lifestyle, right? So even though it's, you know, in essence, it's nothing more than, you know, 2 sticks put together, there is meaning behind it. There is strength behind it. There is power behind it. And when you inflict damage upon it, it becomes an attack on that ideal. And that those types of symbols, and especially things like the cross, are extremely powerful. Extremely powerful. And you know exactly what they mean when you see it, right? You have the whole concept of Christianity in your brain. As soon as you see that cross, you're like, oh, yeah, I know who this person is. I know that this is something that is extremely important to them, that this is something that if is broken or attacked, I know how they're going to react. So you have all of these things that are so very important and can contribute to our understanding of a community. I think it's also important to understand the role of sort of like the expert, right? That priest, because they are also a symbol of that community. And in being in that position, and being a symbol, as being a representative of that community, they have a lot of power, a lot of control. They are the gatekeepers to the afterlife, to the spiritual realm, to the supernatural, right? So if you're a priest, you know, you are essentially that conduit to God, right? If you go into the Catholic Church, you know, and you have committed a sin, and you need to confess your sins, right? So you go to the confessional, and you sit down in there, and you start talking to the priest, and that priest has the power to absolve you of your sins. I mean, that's power, right? That is an immense amount of power and control that someone might have, because they are basically acting as that conduit to God, right? And because of that faith, because of that belief that, you know, you did something wrong, you thought wrong, you did something wrong, you behaved in a wrong way, that you need to get You need the ability to apologize and have that apology accepted by God, because the objective, right? If you don't do that, you're not going to heaven, right? Because you haven't apologized for your sins. So when we're looking at these powerful individuals that become these gatekeepers, they have an immense amount of power, and they can offer favors, right? If you come to them and say, hey, we're trying to have kids, right? My partner and I, we want to have kids, and can you put a good word with the guy upstairs, right? And let us have kids. And the priest will say, nope, no, I don't like how your behavior is. I'm not gonna support you having kids. That's whoa, right? That's crazy. But they can do that, right? They have that power of control to make sure that whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish is either achievable or not achievable. So there's an immense amount of power there that again isn't the same as like martial power, the ability to inflict force or damage. Although if you've ever gone to a Catholic school, certainly capable of inflicting force. That was a joke, but not really. So you've got this ability to control through the connection to the supernatural, and that can have a profound effect on an individual or a community, whether or not you have that religious aspect of your life, and if it's taken away or if it is controlled by someone else, and people have fought wars over this, and they have killed because of this, and done amazingly wonderful things and amazingly tragic things because of this power to influence. Whether it's good or whether it's not, again, isn't necessarily for us to decide. It's to try and understand why, right? Why is this taking place?